So at this time, if you don't mind, please bow your head for a moment of silence while we observe that. Thank you. The final round of the discussion meet will begin in just a moment.
Welcome to the Final Four of the American Farm Bureau Federation Young Farmers and Ranchers Discussion Meet. I am Matthew Sweet of American Farm Bureau Young Farmer and Rancher Committee and come from the great state of California. I will be serving as room chair for this round. At this time, out of respect for all of our competitors, please turn off your cell phones and pagers. Also, please keep distractions as minimal as possible to allow the concentration of the competitors not to be broken. Serving as monitor for this round is Brenda Cooley of the American Farm Bureau of Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee and comes from the great state of Georgia. Serving as timer for this round is Jim Schultz of the American Farm Bureau Federation Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee and comes from the state of New York. The winner of each of the Sweet 16 discussion rounds have advanced to the final round. The topic for this final round is given recent challenges such as volatile food prices to limit world food supplies. American consumers adequately appreciate the importance of U.S. produced food. Will American consumers consider American agriculture important to our security in the future? The judges, timer, and competitors have been briefed to the rules of the competition. I yield control of this competition to your moderator, Brenda.
Thank you, Matt. We appreciate all of you taking the time to attend this competition. Your support is appreciated by the competitors. Competitors, please come take your place up front. Writing is allowed after all competitors have been seating. As your room chair has mentioned, the competitors have been briefed and the competition and realize that their general discussion should be directed towards each other rather than to the audience. In my role as moderator, I will not attempt to control or direct this discussion. Remember, the discussion is meant to simulate a committee meeting, not a panel discussion with point, counterpoint, and an active moderator. As such, I will not intervene unless or until disparaging or inappropriate remarks are made. With that in mind, the burden is on the competitors to moderate themselves and conduct themselves in a cooperative and congenial manner. Competitors, congratulations on your advancement to the final round. The competitors for this round are Charlie Doom, Colin Johnson, Daniel Martin, and Lonnie Reichard. We will begin this discussion with a 30-second opening statement for each competitor. Following the opening statement will be 30 minutes of open discussion, followed by 1 minute of quiet time for the competitors to prepare a 1-minute closing statement. Competitors, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statement. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. The timer will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by holding up a red card. You may now begin.
Volatile food prices and limited world food supplies will eventually catch up with the ever-increasing population. And if our nation is not prepared, this will result in famine and disease. Right now, however, due to the hard work, dedication, and spirit of the farmers and ranchers of our nation, that day has not come in America, nor is it foreseeable. As such, the common American consumer is complacent, and I do not feel that agriculture will become a mainstream national security issue. Thank you.
Can you imagine what it would be like to worry about how you were going to feed your children? Whether or not you could afford food, or if you could find food, was that food you had access to safe? No, you can't. That's because the American consumer has never had to go without. And because of such, they don't adequately appreciate the importance of U.S. produced foods and don't consider agriculture important to our security. We, as Farm Bureau members, need to take on the task of bringing awareness to the American consumer and educate them about the importance of American agriculture.
What does hunger feel like? You've missed a meal and the next one's not quite in sight. I have been in regions of the world where food cost was great, where safety was a concern, where quality was quite limited. However, there were no complaints about these concerns because guess what? They had food. In our land of safe, wholesome, and affordable plenty, can we in mainstream America truly feel hunger, strife, and danger associated with food? Or have we become complacent with the thought of a full belly?
There is only one thing that can bring our nation down, and that is a dependence on foreign countries for food and oil. Colorado Congressman John Salazar was certainly onto something when he shared this conviction. Our discussion today will explore the reverberating impact of not adequately appreciating American agriculture, an industry that has been instrumental in defining America as a global power. I look forward to discussing how we have moved away from our agrarian roots and how we should proceed moving forward to ensure the prosperity of our industry.
You have heard the opening statements. The competitors may now proceed with the discussion.
Lonnie,
Please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
Well, guys, I don't
Lonnie,
know
your
about
comments
y'all.
earlier on on famine and the importance of not knowing what it is to be hungry is something that strikes my heart. And you mentioned traveling around the world and seeing that. Having lived in Africa, having lived in Eastern Europe, I've seen that too. I've gone hungry with the families that I lived with. Can you talk about in your community, Lonnie, why that was something that really struck you to bring forward today?
Well, I think it's kind of like an electricity issue. None of us appreciate the importance of electricity until the lights go out. When you don't have power because of an ice storm or whatever, causes your power to go out, then you really appreciate how important that is. And in America, we have never been faced with the fact that we don't have food to eat. Our next meal is just around the corner at the grocery store, the local fast food restaurant, or right outside at the vending machine. Food is always there. And unless you are forced with facing the fact that you don't have it, you're not going to adequately appreciate it.
Building on Lonnie's idea, I mean, in my hometown, it's we're southern state, and when we have weather such as this that just come through, you're going to invariably have a grandmother or someone tell you, you better get to the grocery store to get your milk and bread.
Right.
And it will go out, but I don't think people consider what would happen if that wasn't there, if that milk and bread wasn't restocked within a day or two, and it took 2 or 3 weeks, there'd be pandemonium.
I agree with you, Daniel, very much so. We can go to the store any day and get what we need. Do we really consider what that food is and the process that it took to get there? That's what we really need to look at today and kind of help see, can we communicate and connect with consumer from a farmer standpoint and say, the importance of what we do today is important. How can you also contribute back to us and say, what else do you need to assure you that food is there every day? I think if you look locally in your regions, what are you doing maybe to connect with consumers and maybe understand them? I'll bring one piece of light to this conversation in the fact that the Center for Food Integrity has done a lot of research. Charlie Arnott is the head of that group. And he's found recently that consumers do trust American food supply. I'll make that fact plain that I think they do in general. Now, there is a fraction that may not, in a global sense, appreciate food. But locally, I think they do understand and appreciate that. But what are we doing as farmers and ranchers within the Farm Bureau or your locally some movements to connect with consumers about that?
Well, going back to your idea, Colin, about the trust on the food supply, while I agree with you, the majority of Americans do trust in the American food supply, but then you have that very vocal minority which pushes a large amount of propaganda forward, and in so doing, they influence legislation as a voice of the minority instead of the majority because they're so vocal and because they have that misrepresentation that they're speaking for the people.
Daniel, I'd love to go back to Colin's original question, which was, what can we do at our local level to make a difference and to speak to those groups? Because Bob Stallman mentioned that with social media and outlets such as that, we are making a difference. We are turning the tide. In my local Farm Bureau, are you familiar with Farmville on Facebook?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. This is a great utility because it's reaching out to people that have absolutely no connection to agriculture. And for the first time in their lives, they're like, oh, I'm planting things. It's in a virtual world, but they're doing it. So what we did is we took the opportunity to advertise right next to and link to Farmville. What we found is after 1 month of a $45 investment in that advertisement, we got over 1 million views.
You know, another thing that you mentioned, you asked what we're doing in our local communities. In South Carolina, we have well, we talked about yesterday the local food movement. We discussed the benefits and stuff of the local food movement, and I think that is a great way to connect with the consumer and discuss with them these issues and build that relationship. I'm from Lexington, South Carolina, and we have a great agri-entertainment industry. We have some of the people that are on our women's committee, on our Young Farmer and Rancher committee, actually have a corn maze. They bring people to their farm school tours. They educate people. We have a lot of roadside stands and roadside markets where people are really connecting and building that relationship with the people in our community. Another thing that we can do, that we probably are doing and we could always do better, is to build a relationship with our local media so that when negative things come about, like you said, there's always going to be misperceptions. When negative things come about, we can go to the media and we can say, you know what, this is the truth. We need to correct this story. This is how we go about doing it. And I think that Farm Bureau on both a state and a national level does a great job at doing that on the big picture, but we need to be instrumental in doing that on the local level.
You mentioned the media. That is a big piece to this puzzle, because the media is one that I think confuses our consumers or purchasers of our product, whether that's food or not. We really have to look at how do we show our transparency to the media. Our adversarial groups have captured on the media. Media always wants something new and exciting, something dangerous, I think, and that's where our adversaries have pinpointed us. Where have they had success, and what causes people to really not trust their food system? It's when we hear in the media of contaminations, recalls, when we hear that the doors to farms are closed. We really have to start opening up and being transparent. I want to go back to Farmville. Is that truly working for you? Because to me, that it's a game. We're farmers. My hands are in the soil every day on my farm. I think the real goal to me is really how do I open up my farm and farms and ranches across this country, show consumers, invite them in, welcome reporters, welcome TVs, and I know as Farm Bureau we've been doing a great job using social media and other resources. How do we encourage and ignite that fire?
There's some important statistics around social media and its ability to convey a message to consumers. And so what we're doing is we're trying to make that first linkage. So, living in a city of more than 8 million people, you have to start somewhere. And by creating that first link, people are very interested in this game, and it's very, very useful in creating that first connection. So what we've done is direct them to our local Farm Bureau website, which we got a deluge of questions, which we can't even begin to address immediately, and that creates its own problem, but it's a great problem to have. And it's creating that discussion. The Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food program that was brought forth by the Obama administration and Secretary Vilsack is, again, addressing that. And what it's doing is it's encouraging the promotion of local food systems, encouraging people to ask questions about where their food's coming from, who's producing it, giving you a chance to have a free farm day where you invite people out to your farm and show them how to get their hands dirty and how to do some of those provocative things in farming in a positive light. Do you have an example of where you've brought people, Colin, into your own farm?
Certainly. We have been doing a very good job, and I want to demonstrate an example from actually a neighboring county. That has a county seat, which actually in that county we have a religious institution, very much vegan oriented, and they have an art walk one Friday out of every summer. And Farm Bureau approached the county farm, or excuse me, the Chamber of Commerce there, and said, we'd like to do something. We're a part of this community, very vital, more so than even art. And what can we do to join in? Give us a portion of the square, art on the square. We're going to come in this Friday night, and we're going to have Meet a Farmer. Open ourselves up. We're going to bring equipment in. We're going to bring our lifestyle in. More importantly, we're just going to be there as farmers and put a face on it. At the same time, we provided food and talked about the food safety efforts that start on the farm every day. And it's a long process between the farm to the consumer, obviously, so we've got a lot to work on there as well. Daniel, you were earlier getting ready to say something in that
Thank you, Colin. What I was going to say was I was building on yours and Lonnie's ideas before about how to combat this mainstream anti-policy against farming, and also how to connect with our neighbors. And one way that our local Farm Bureau has gotten together, our Farm Bureau members, is in supporting the local farmers market. And that was put together, we're a smaller town, but it was put together with ideas that someone who moved from a bigger city up north came down and implemented that into our community. And through that cooperation, once those people see those ads, they see that propaganda, it's one of those integral things that's important to us, that they could be able to sit down and say, well, yes, this person's telling me this, but I know this man. He goes to church with me. He lives down the street from me, and I've been to his farm. He's invited me out there. He helped me work on my engine last week. And it's those kinds of relationships that are technically going to push this nation forward to understanding agriculture.
You know, another thing that I think about as far as combating the negative things, a lot of business people, you don't really consider agriculture business. If you look at big companies, they have, I think, what they term crisis management plans, where they look towards the future and say, you know what, we kind of think that down the road, this may be an issue. So we're going to go ahead now and we're going to come up with our response to this issue. So when that hits the media, we're ready. We don't have to spend time developing our response and developing our answers and doing our research. And I think that's something that we need to take on, and not even necessarily as Farm Bureau staff, but us as individuals. Yes. And you know, the Farm Bureau staff will be there to help us with that. But if you see a story, say something comes out about using corn for biofuels versus how it's going to affect our food industry. You know, that could be a hot topic in the future. I mean, it has been already. We can be prepared. We can already have something written up or, you know, in our file. So if that comes out in our local paper or wherever, we can say, you know, we have a response to this, and we've got that response quick. And I think that's something that we really need to do to be proactive in counteracting these negative things. And you talk about American perception. Perception is the truth in people's minds until you tell them, you know, you have to change their mind. However they see it is the truth in their minds.
Lonnie, what you're bringing up is an absolutely critical point, and we've got a USDA report coming out on Wednesday that's going to tell us what the stocks are here in America. In crisis management, our method of crisis management to this point has been maintaining minimal stocks, or maintaining a reasonable level of stocks. Over the period of 2010, we've gone down in our stocks by 25%. Globally, it's the same story. So I'd like to shift our discussion a little bit towards food security. You mentioned, Colin, earlier a little bit about food prices. So when we're talking about crisis management, we can bring it all the way back to commodity prices, to corn prices. We've seen fluctuation just over the last 4 days of 30 cents in corn, 40 cents in wheat. It's incredible, and we're looking at a carryout in corn of about 400 billion bushels right now. We need about 400 million bushels. We need 1 billion bushels to be comfortable.
But what does that truly relate to the consumer, though? From a farm and a grain standpoint, how do I relate that to, say, what's the price of a piece of pizza at the grocery store? Because there's a lot of things go into that pizza, and most of our cost in food production really is a post-production cost. If the farmer's only receiving 20%, how do we help the consumer understand that the rest of that is a post-processing cost?
The consumer makes the decision based on price. When you bring your cornflakes up to $8, they're going to wonder what's going on.
So it's a food system issue.
Our food system is so complex at this stage that we can have a failure in any one part of the world, and that's going to rock all of us. Right now, we've got La Nina in South America, we've got droughts in Russia, we've got a flood in Canada. We have all of these macro elements that are coming together, and we have not appropriated the dislocations in our market to account for those price differences.
I think that's exactly right, Charlie. And I think the environmental people like to use the terms, you know, think globally and act locally. I think in agriculture, we're very good at acting locally, but we have to think globally and do things to educate the consumers to help them be aware of the fact that the global market controls a lot of what we see in America. You know, it's a supply and demand issue, and it's not just within our borders. It's, you know, you can have a major disaster in Argentina or anywhere else across the world, and they lose, you know, their crop. Well, demand's got to come. The demand's still there. The supply is less. That's going to affect our food prices. You know, it's not
right. One of the bottom lines is, and you likely heard this before, if you like buying foreign oil, you're going to love buying foreign food. And the importance of that goes back to what you're saying. This is a global economy, like building on Charlie's idea. If we don't protect what we're growing here to make sure that we can adequately supply and have the sustainability for our local communities, we're putting ourselves at risk. Yes, this is one of the few areas in our industry that has a surplus on our exports. But you know, does the American consumer understand that? And that's where they've gotten complacent at. And so we got to bring it back home to them, that they can understand that while the Farm Bill, you know, bringing this to the Farm Bill portion, you know, they're talking about cuts. We're all sitting here, and we've all talked. I'm sure you've been in many conferences or heard them talk about the drastic cuts we're looking in the new Farm Bill, and how are we going to prepare for that, and what programs are we going to change, and which ones are we just going to have to scrap. And that's sad because of the percentage of the budget which actually goes into the Farm Bill being less than 1%. And if our agriculture, which feeds this entire nation, without being able to eat, people are going to quit going to work, and our nation is going to grind to a halt. but they don't want to allocate the budget, and which means they don't want to allocate the importance to agriculture that it actually is. Lonnie?
Well, you talk about national security. I think there's national security is a threefold issue. You've got financial standpoint, where you look at our national debt. You've got fuel, our dependence on foreign oil, and you've got food. Right now, with our finances, I think China owns us. I mean, we've got a huge national debt problem, and a lot of that is controlled by China. You've got foreign oil, it's controlled by the Middle East. Right now, food, we have control over our food supply. In order to be a deciding factor where we can make our own decisions and we're not completely at the mercy of somebody else, we have to make sure that that stays that way. We need to do a lot of work on our own energy sources and getting our finances under control. But right now, we are good with the food, and we just have to make certain that we stay there. And we need to get that message to the consumers. I think it's critical that everybody, not just those of us in the agriculture industry, but everybody understand that importance.
You talk a lot about monetary policy in there, and Daniel was talking about Farm Bill. And one of the overriding goals I believe the Farm Bill has done since 1933, and the first one, and USDA's mission, is the secure provision of affordable food to this country. Right. Are we accomplishing that mission? Moving forward in the fact that, are we sure that consumers have enough in this country? I think they do. I think we have plenty. You would probably agree with that. Across this country, the diversity of farms and products we represent. Is the precursor to us solving the United States food security problem really a precursor to the world's food security issues? Is that the big picture we need to look at today?
On 10% of the arable land in the world, which is what we work with in America, we provide 18% of the world's food. And to speak to the safety and security of the food here at home, we have less than 0.02% of deaths from foodborne illness in the entire world here in America. We've also got 4% of the population, so I think those are some great statistics. Obviously, we'd like it to be zero, but when we look at the safety of the food that we're supplying and the security that provides us and provides the nations that we provide with our exports, we have an incredible leverage. Now, Loni, you mentioned China, and China is something that takes up a lot of my time in my evaluation of agricultural markets. And what we're finding is that they're not as elastic as a consumer of meat production as they once were. So when we're talking about prices and elevation of price, if you've got a dependable market that you can truly believe is going to continue to take your commodities, take your feed, take your DDGs that you might provide through some of the freight that you are involved with in South Carolina, that's a huge asset. How do we leverage ourselves to ensure that our industry, not just from the education of the people that are consuming our food here domestically, but how do we leverage that with our constituents, with our legislators, to ensure that we get not just through the Farm Bill, but through other legislation, very proactive, very progressive farm policy in general?
Charlie, one thing we've done in my home state, we have a coalition. The primary goal of this is to help farmers, livestock farmers, build farms responsibly and successfully. One thing that we have done, and it's fallen on the ears of our government and our legislator in our state very well, is we're calling out bad actors in our industry. I mentioned transparency earlier. That's something we have to do. We look in my home region there this summer, we had the egg problems associated with salmonella. And the owner of that egg farm, Wright County Eggs, also has farms in the northeast part of the state, is a traditional bad actor. Many environmental regulations, let alone the food safety issue this summer, and employee immigration things. We have to give us and our food system credibility. It's resounding for us in our government. I think we should maybe capitalize on that. It's a transparency, calling out bad actors. Do you see other similar things?
Well, Colin, speaking back to your former question before about the government involvement, how do we adequately protect the balance of food price? And that's a balancing act, and because we want our farmers to operate in a free market, whereas so they can do what they want because it's their business, it's their family they're feeding with it. But on the other hand, we want to be able to give them the adequate support that they need to compete on a global market, which feeds into Charlie's statement from earlier before. On a global market, we have to understand that with this part of the industry being exported as much as it is, that's an integral part of our profits, which means that a lot of these programs are going to have to stay so that we can remain competitive worldwide. And that goes back to the security, because the success of the American farmers means the success of America. And but we have to correlate that, and it might go back to ads and a campaign of what we were speaking on earlier, just to get that message across that while this money is being spent in a certain way that you see, oh, it's just those farmers. Well, those farmers is what makes this country run.
Daniel, can I ask you to explore my question? I love how you're summing everything up. When I asked, how do we leverage our position as a food exporter? Can you shine some light on that, please?
Well, the idea of leveraging your position is, one, we want to be able to stay where we are in the World Trade Organization as a amicable member. We don't want to make anybody hostile to the United States. And so certain of our economic policies is creating that extra surplus so we can give it to third world countries. That creates other countries, they're nice to us. And I mean, and that allows our soldiers to be over there on bases and to, protect everyone abroad that we need to protect our interests over abroad. It extends into a lot of other markets other than agriculture. And, going back to that, your question is that these programs allow us to do that. The commodity subsidization program allows us to build up reserves in order to take those reserves and give them to India when they have floods through 20% of their cropland. And that's the way we're supporting America.
I'm a little confused in that regards too, though, because one question when I look at this kind of a topic and globally in food security, we hear quite often that export subsidies are driving down prices in places like Mexico and Africa. But on the same hand, we hear that world grain prices are raising the price of food. What's the real answer? Charlie, you have some experience in that area, it sounds like, on some international marketing. Can you contribute to thought there? Because when I come back to my home and marketing grain every day, I know what I receive. Fortunately, at the times, prices are good for the farm level. Is that good for the world, and what's our government's impact on that?
This is an interesting platform to discuss that and explore it, because Farm Bureau's policy in the American Farm Bill has had in the past a very important role in ensuring that America continues to produce adequate food supplies. But the question that I would pose back to each of you is whether or not that farm policy has reached its peak, and whether or not we need to shift those dollars into perhaps crop insurance that ensures, instead of a market failure, ensures that the farm producer can, on his farm, expect a certain yield. And not to move away from your direct question about how those volatile prices move back and forth, but to ask one that I think is even more relevant in our discussion about security and about Farm Bureau and our role in policy is, what should that bill look like going forward? It's unpopular, it's incredibly unpopular, and I know that, but we have to ask those tough questions.
Well, I think one thing that we need to remember as far as does it need to change and what should that bill look like, you said about, so the American farmer can expect or guarantee or whatever a certain yield, how you had it. And Farm Bureau policy says from the Farm Bill and from our government, we want safety nets. We do not want guarantees. And if we keep the safety nets, then that allows for the free market system so that, supply and demand can drive everything. And I think that was a good point to bring up. One thing I want to touch back on is we're having a great discussion about all this different stuff in the global economy. The question here is, do American consumers appreciate U.S. produced foods, and do they think it's important to our national security? And I'm just curious, what do you think about that? Is that something that they think is important? And if not, what do we do about changing that?
Well, Lonnie, thank you so much for bringing us back to topic, because on the Farm Bill, we may have been getting off a little bit there. I think a native of my home state, Norman Borlaug, he once said, "You can't build a peaceful world on empty stomachs and human misery." Right here in America, we do have some hungry. Even here in Atlanta, 22% of the population lives in poverty. There's more impoverished children in this city than in any other city in the States. To me, that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to Norman Borlaug, and we ought to continue his legacy on feeding the world. When he started the Green Revolution about 1960, we only could feed about half as many people as we do today, on twice as much as far as what it would cost people to do it. We have done an incredible job in our system of keeping food costs low, partly due to the Farm Bill policies, I agree, and some monetary things that have made an impact. But moving forward, to connect with consumers every day and assure them of a safe food supply, domestically produced, and that we can, at the same time, ability to ship and get products out. What's the key What's the key that's going to incentivize not only me as a producer, because I think we have enough capable ability and technology to produce. Borlaug predicted we would reach 10 billion people by 2050. The number says 9 billion. He said, we've got the technology and the seed available to do it. Will we have access to it's another thing. Are consumers going to accept it as part of a safe thing in the process of selecting food? Daniel, your
Well, going back to
contributions.
Lonnie's statement, I understand that some of it is a little bit of rabbit trails, but the Farm Bill is very important, and especially the commodity subsidization, which it seems like they're trying to bullseye as part of their possible cuts. Because a lot of my friends back home, they look at that, and while yes, they look at it and they're able to plan on that because it allows them to plan for the future. You know, we've had, 2 years ago, we had a bad rain that came through and wiped out a lot of our sweet potato crops. This year, we didn't have any rain for a long time. It was never going to come. But, you know, that kind of subsidization program allows us to, even though we're going to have fluctuations in cost and fluctuations in price and all kinds of other inputs, that's one thing that allows us to try to find some kind of static norm to depend on. And that's vital for our security. Because, and that goes back to, and why that's vital to our security is because that's what they're talking about cutting. You know, if they cut it, we won't have it. And if we don't have it, that's jeopardizing American farms, especially smaller ones. What do y'all think about that?
The ultimate thing here is, the question is, what's in the consumer's mind, and when are they going to realize that it's a security issue? And we come back to where we started with famine. We haven't experienced that on our soil.
No.
We haven't experienced war here in our generation, so we don't know what that's like. So famine is what it all comes back to. And what causes famine is price fluctuations. So sorry to keep pulling it back to price and coming back to issues that we've already discussed, but ultimately, until the consumer is pulled awake by price, they're not going to think it's a security issue, and they're not going to think it's important. You know, it's sexy and romantic to think about locally grown food, but is it really feasible? Is it sustainable? What does sustainability really mean? Let's define that. What does sustainable food production mean, and how does that affect a consumer in New York, a consumer in California, a consumer in Iowa?
Well, to not only address price, but also just simply accessibility. Because unfortunately, a lot of people in this world leaders, use food as power. It's not right. In Borlaug, go back to Borlaug, he said that food is a moral right of every piece of mankind. And to really look at that issue of addressing that need, can we really supply the needs of our consumers? Yes, we can. We can all, again, go back to that point, we can supply their needs. And to really think about that question, Robbie Keener, when he started filming Food Inc., he went around to our farms and ranches to really look at where does food come from, what goes into making its cost. And he went to ask farmers to really look at the process. He came to Iowa and he looked at our cornfields. And the biggest thing he found in that process was when he asked farmers to help him and show him, he got a bunch of no's. No, you're not coming to farm. No, I don't want to assist you. That media issue. We've got to stop that process. We've got to continue to be transparent, because if I think I communicated earlier, 20% of that food dollar comes back to the farmer and the rest doesn't. Mm-hmm. Am I hitting on the answer that you're looking for or not in that question? Because
you brought up a really interesting point there when you're talking about that particular video of Food Inc., because, you know, I sat back and watched it in awe of what was being portrayed, and that's what the standard American consumer takes a bite of, is Food Inc., Omnivore's Dilemma, a myriad of other propaganda, really. They're not telling the full picture. No. And what we have to do as agriculture is be provocative. We have to tell our story to the masses, and we have to do it in a way that people are interested in it. Yeah. And so Monsanto, somebody that we would look at as the big, probably the worst person or the worst entity to put forward our mission, put this ad out over Thanksgiving, which was called Thank a Farmer. I don't know if any of you guys saw the Thank a Farmer commercial, but what it did is it walked down the streets of Chicago and the streets of New York and asked people, did you know that one farmer feeds 155 people? And the shock and amazement on their faces just made me feel warm and gave me goosebumps, because I'm like, you know, these are people that need to know this. They're going to go home, they're going to Google this, they're going to go to Wiki, they're going to explore agriculture.
You know, I would like to bring up, you made the point that famine and these things are what make you appreciate the importance of agriculture. it's not very likely, at least in our lifetime, for that to happen in America. So it comes back to being our responsibility to get our story out there, to educate the consumer about the importance of American-produced agriculture and what it means for our country. I would like to pose a question to you. You know, we've talked about some of the things that other people are doing, like Monsanto and different things. What is something that we, individually, young farmers, what can we do to make the consumers aware of this, to make them see the importance of agriculture in America?
Well, Lonnie, going back to your prior question and to answer this one, is the short answer about whether consumers appreciate agriculture and security is no, they don't. You know, we're 2 to 3 generations removed from the farm for the majority. 80% of Americans live in cities. They have no connection to it, like you said. And so going to this, how do we move it forward as young farmers and ranchers? Well, part of that is coming together and speaking on Charlie's idea from earlier about these fluctuating food prices. Part of that may have to come with an advertising campaign calling them on these price fluctuations. Because as grain and corn fluctuates, the price of the cereal and price of the bread is static above what we're putting in. So what we're getting on profit is going up and down, but what they're getting is either increasing or getting even better. And we're going to have to call them on that. And we're going to have to show them that out of every loaf of bread you're buying at $3, we're only getting 20 cents.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned an advertising campaign, a PR campaign. You think about,
Sorry, time has been called. Thank you, competitors. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask that the audience remain silent for 1 minute to aid the competitors in their preparation. Please put down your pencils and in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1 minute closing statement.
So what does hunger look like? On my desk, I have a picture of a young Haitian boy running through the streets with a pork loin strung over his shoulder. On his face is fear and panic. In the background is rioting and looting, and when you think of looting, what do you generally think of? TVs, stereos, high-dollar items, right? Not this young man. He's getting food for his family. Does he recognize the importance of food to his security? You bet he does. In America, do we? That's a good question. I think we should. We do produce enough. We've discussed some very important points in that process today. I think moving forward as Farm Bureau members, we do need to continue to connect with consumers and be transparent in our process. We need to work within the food chain to help understand what does that food dollar represent. And more importantly, we just need to keep producing, helping our food consumers have the products and choices they have. And most importantly, we must remember that safe, healthy eating means safe, healthy living. It begins on the American farm, and it starts with Farm Bureau.
I just want to say thank you to the farmers and ranchers in this room for the food on my plate and the shirt on my back. And it's our job as members of Farm Bureau to make sure that every family in America wakes up in the morning and understands that same thing. Because at the end of the day, agriculture is the security of this nation. If we can't feed our family, if we can't feed our economy, this economy and our families don't go. That's the bottom line. And through programs such as media and education and getting to know farmers as your friend, we're going to move that forward and we're going to see success in that area. Because at the end of the day, we are Farm Bureau and we are the voice of agriculture. Thank you.
You know, over 200 years ago, President Washington said that it will not be doubted in reference to either personal or national welfare that agriculture is of the utmost importance. That was true 200 years ago. That is true today, maybe even more so today because of the growing world population and the task that we are given to feed this world. We've discussed the fact of whether or not American consumers adequately appreciate American agriculture, and I think we all agree that the answer is no, because they've never had to go without. And until something like that were to happen, they would not appreciate it. It is our responsibility as farmers and ranchers and members of Farm Bureau to connect with the consumers and educate them on why agriculture is important in our country. We can do this through being proactive, through crisis management plans like we discussed. We can do this through working with our local media. We can do this on a one-on-one basis on the local level. And that is a task that we are given, and it is important to all of us that we do a very good job at succeeding at that.
In agriculture, more so than in any other industry, we are defined by the fruits of our labor. Bob Stallman's quote from this week makes me question something. What does it matter what the definition is if nobody's looking it up? Lonnie asked us to think about what we can do individually to perpetuate an understanding of the importance of agriculture. Whether it's putting on a t-shirt that says "Naked and Hungry" on the back and explaining why American agriculture is important on the back, we've got to be provocative. Colin talked about transparency and credibility. As farmers, we have to be credible, but we've also got to be transparent in the community and further perpetuating that vision and what we do to the entire public. And Daniel, you talked a bit about leveraging agriculture and leveraging our strengths. That's fundamentally what we've got to do moving forward so that we don't have to be a nation of food insecurity.
Okay, let's show these competitors our appreciation for a job well done. At this time, I will turn control back over to Matt.
Thank you, Brenda, for a well-run competition. The judges for today's competition are Tara Smith, Dan Durheim, Roger Phelps, Bob Ragsdale, and Cheryl Sally. Now I would like to ask the judges to report with me to the tabulation room, Mrs. Monitor.
Okay, thank you, judges and competitors. The winner of this final round will be announced at the awards program during general session this afternoon. We would now like each competitor to make a brief statement about him or herself and their operation. In voluntary order.
Oh, everybody's pointing to me. I'm originally from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, recently moved back from Australia to the big city of New York. I work as a commodity analyst for Bunge Global Markets and also provide a lot of marketing and management back to my family farm, which is a vegetable and grain operation in central Kentucky.
My name is Colin Johnson. I represent the Midwest and all those landlocked states today, I believe. From Iowa, we raise corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and cattle on our diversified operation. Also have a small sweet corn enterprise, more of a community project than anything. But my wife and I and our 2-year-old son are on that farm. He's my best farm hand and my best crop, you would say these days. We have another one coming here any day as well. Farm alongside my grandfather and my grandmother in Agency, Iowa. I also work part-time for Iowa State University in a swine extension role, which I held prior to starting full-time farming.
My name's Daniel Martin. My wife and I, Frances, live in Water Valley, Mississippi. That's a small community where I practice law as an ag lawyer. I help the local farmers and ranchers get things done in the legal community, in the legal world. My wife's family is in the poultry industry, and that's my tie to the Farm Bureau.
My name is Lonnie Reichert. I am from Lexington, South Carolina. I was born and raised on a commercial produce farm, and after finishing school, I came back to work on the farm full-time as farm manager before I took over as director of operations for Rocky Wells Trucking, which is a family-owned company. We specialize in selling and distributing bulk agricultural commodities, a lot of feed, fertilizer, lime, grain. We operate throughout the Southeast and up into the Midwest. I have been involved in Farm Bureau probably since the day I was born. I've been actively involved on the county level in my Women's Committee and Young Farmer and Ranchers Committee since 2002, and I currently serve as chair of our Lexington County Farm City Programs Committee. My husband, Marty, and I have 2 children. Carly is 4 and Noah is 1.
Thank you. We appreciate your support for the Young Farmers and Ranchers program, and we look forward to your attendance at the general session where we will announce the winners of the 2011 Young Farmers and Ranchers competitive events. The general session will be held in Exhibit Hall A3 starting at 3 p.m. There is reserved seating for the final 4 competitors and your spouses. Thank you.